Welcome to Authors and Innovators, our book and ideas event celebrating writers, leaders, and big thinkers. We're now in our 8th year, and I am delighted that we have someone on today who is all three of those things. US Senator Tim Kaine, former Democratic vice presidential candidate, and he is here to talk about Walk, Ride, and Paddle, his insightful and engaging new book. Thank you for being here, Senator.
Larry, I'm really very happy to be with you, especially since you're a William and Mary grad. We claim you.
We need to talk about citizen lawyers and being men and women for others, but we'll get to that. I'm excited about it. You talk about this book as an epic journey into the faraway nearby. What does that mean?
Larry, it's an account of a nature journey, but one of the things, I love nature and travel and adventure books, but so many of them are about, climbing Mount Everest or adventures that are far away that you may never even see the place, but you love to read about it. Georgia O'Keeffe has a beautiful painting called From the Far Away Nearby that I've always really loved. And in working on this Virginia nature triathlon, I kind of viewed it as it's about the far away nearby, the things that are close at hand for me living in Richmond, but that I don't know as well as I might want to know them. And so it's a very intentional journey to look at the things that are nearby rather than things that are distant, and a love letter to my Commonwealth.
A great part of this book was that each chapter is about a different part of the journey. And I found this a lot like a Wendell Berry book or Wallace Stegner, where the bluebird sings to Lemonade Springs. Every chapter, I was interested, where are we going today? So you did hiking, riding, and paddling. Can you talk about those three different activities and how you did them?
I will, Larry. So I was running for re-election in 2018 and turned 60 and decided I want to mark this milestone. Can't do it till after the election. The election was over and I thought, what can I do? And then I thought, I'm going to create a quest for Virginians, similar to in New York, there's a thing called the 46ers. If you climb all the Adirondack peaks, 46 of them higher than 4,000 feet. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law have done those, and I've accompanied them on a couple. I thought, what's the Virginia version of this? And I decided it was hike 560 miles on the Appalachian Trail. Virginia has more mileage than any other state from Harper's Ferry to Tennessee. Bicycle on the Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive, 320 miles, and then canoe the entire James River from almost the West Virginia border into the Chesapeake Bay, 350 miles. And I did it over the course of about 30 months from May of 2019 through October of 2021. And so it was to create something that I might be then able to encourage other Virginians to do, just like the New Yorkers do, the 46ers. But that was just the very beginning of the concept. I had no idea how much I would learn along the way about myself, my Commonwealth, our history, our nation. And it was, in the best sense, a physical journey is often a match for a life journey or a spiritual journey. And I very much, at the end of this 1,230-mile sojourn, felt like I had been both on a physical journey and a spiritual one, too.
It certainly feels that way. It is a book that really covers the personal, historical, and geographical history experience of Virginia. I can speak from my own personal experience, but we can claim you here in part because this book was inspired by Thoreau. And in particular, you talk about a week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers. And so I'm delighted that we inspired you from your days here in Massachusetts.
It was one of the great things about being at Harvard Law School is I had a bike and I'd ride out to Walden Pond and hang out there. And I love Thoreau. Of course, he's maybe most known for Walden and some of the other writings. But a week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers, Larry, has always been a real touchstone for me. Thoreau and his brother John decided to take this week-long river trip, a boat that they built. They filled it with produce from their garden. They went down the Concord to the confluence with the Merrimack. They went up their Merrimack into New Hampshire. Thoreau kept notes, didn't do anything with the notes. Then his brother John ended up dying of tetanus. And years later, when Thoreau went to Walden, what he was doing at Walden was turning the notes of his trip with John into this book, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. And it's a beautiful book because each day is about, yes, what happened that day, but it's also an elegy to his brother. It's a meditation on male friendship. It's a discussion of the challenges going on in American society at the time that Thoreau was writing it. And so if I modeled my book after anything, and I've got to be humble enough, Thoreau is a high standard, but it was that book of a nature journey with reflections kind of braided in on everything from friendship to aging to marriage to what's going on in society. And I was very much motivated by that. And I've spent some time in a canoe on the Concord River during my time in law school and cherish those memories very dearly.
What I loved about that piece, particularly as you talk about Thoreau and his brother, is you use these kind of outdoor experiences to connect to family, to keep friendships in good repair, to connect to yourself and your own thoughts. And so it also struck me that this book really paid homage to that because that's how you did it. Where did you first get interested in this being outdoors? And importantly, this is a scoop from the book, I'm not going to ruin it, you're a guy who sleeps on the ground.
Yeah, it's a bizarre ability of mine. I've never minded sleeping on the ground. When I grew up, my parents loved being outside, going to a baseball game, having a picnic, but not really campers. But I had two experiences as a kid. Boy Scout Troop 395 at Curie of Ars Catholic Church in Overland Park, Kansas. I was a very lackluster scout if you measure by merit badges, but I would get really active right before any camping trip, and I developed a love that way. And then I had a teacher, a seventh grade shop teacher named Joe McKenzie, who didn't have kids, and sometimes he would say, like on a Wednesday or Thursday, anybody want to go camping this weekend? And sure, well, why not? 10 or 12 of us. I wasn't his best student, but that didn't keep him from asking. 10 or 12 of us would go camping, and his love of the outdoors and my Boy Scout experiences then made me convince my parents, I'm the oldest of three boys, let's buy a tent, let's do some camping. My parents then became fantastic outdoors people and campers. My brothers did too. My wife, Ann, loves camping. Our kids were all in tents by the time they were 6 months old. But I had not seen Joe McKenzie for 50 years. When I went back to Kansas City for Thanksgiving, I decided I need to look him up. And I found him, and he's now retired. And I told him how much he had meant in my life. And, he was unaware that he put me on a path that has been a path of being in the outdoors and living outdoors, for decades. And I was touched to find him, and he was touched to hear me give him credit.
I love that part. And you talk about joy shocks, and you talk about nature deficit disorder as something that is one of the many things plaguing America. Can you talk a bit more about that? Is it a thing?
Yeah. Well, it's joy shocks are when you're walking on a rainy May day and everything looks kind of foggy and sodden, and then you look at a stump and a brilliant orange mushroom has just come out maybe in the last day or so, and it's the most vivid color and all the grayness surrounding you on this 3-part journey again and again and again. It might have been sturgeon leaping out of the water, an endangered species that is now reclaimed, or seeing bald eagles, or having a shocking encounter with a bear. But the shocks of being in nature remind me that I'm on this too much. You go in. If you go into a Senate hearing room, Larry, you've probably seen this, the witness might be talking, but it's so common that all the staff members and senators are looking at their screens. And so I really disconnected during this hike. I would carry a phone, but I carried it in my backpack, not in a pocket. And I would, look at it at the beginning of the day, look at it at the end of the day, make a few notes about that day so that when I went back later, I could write it up. But just disconnecting from the this screen life, and it was part of what we need to do to kind of deal with this nature deficit disorder. We have to reconnect to the natural world, and that trip bred some habits in me that I have continued since I finished the journey.
It struck me that one of the prescriptions, policy prescriptions that you're certainly you want people to take to heart is more green time and less screen time, it seems to me.
That is, you summarized it very well.
Tell me about this journey. As I'm reading this, in many cases, although not in all cases, you're alone. You're sleeping alone, you're walking alone, you're encountering people who are saying, wait a minute, I know who you are. Can you talk about your thinking behind that? You just did this.
Yeah, the hiking portion was 42 days, and I did 2/3 of it by myself. And not only was I hiking by myself, I was hiking, much of it was in August. It was a record-setting heat summer in 2019. Water sources were dry along the way. Very few people were on the trail. And so I wasn't only hiking by myself, but I would go day after day after day without even seeing someone. I'd round a corner and there would be 2 deer, and I would feel good because I had company, for 30 seconds. But that also was a powerful thing, that time of solitude. I'm a Myers-Briggs introvert, which means that I love interacting with people, but I need to recharge my battery with alone time. But sometimes on the trail, it's like, hey, look, I'm an introvert, but this is going a little bit too far. And I would say probably the solitude, the physical aspect of the hike was very hard. The mental aspect of the hike was harder, because in times of solitude, it's like, why do I have to do the whole thing? I could just do a day trip. I mean, there's nothing.
Right.
I need to be so high about finishing this whole thing. And so those voices in your head that start to raise doubts are very prominent when you're by yourself, and you have to face them down.
And you did a lot of thinking in different ways in these kind of experiences. How was your perspective changed, whether it's hiking, riding, or paddling, or was it?
A couple of things changed. I think partly because of, the time of life turning 60. Each of the 3 segments kind of had a metaphor that bubbled up as I'm on the way. The hike, it's kind of an obvious one. Some of life is tough uphill slogs, campaigns you don't win, or legislative efforts that just seem like they're never going to happen. But some you get on the downhill side or in the shade, and it's a little bit easier. That's an obvious metaphor. Cycling, for those who do cycling, you use bikes with derailleurs, and you have front derailleurs and back ones. And most of your gear shifting is the small shifts on the back rings. You shift the front derailleur at big changes of terrain. And I kind of felt like I'm entering a 3rd ring of my life. The first ring was like the civil rights ring. The second ring, and that was an 18-year, civil rights lawyer. The second ring has been this 30-year public service chapter where I brought my civil rights passion into it, but I wasn't doing it in a courtroom. I've been doing it as an elected official. And I felt like the bike trip made me realize at age 60 and climbing, I'm entering a little more of a spiritual, contemplative ring of my life. Again, bringing my earlier passions with me, but looking at things differently. And then the river trip, the metaphor of the river trip that occurred to me fairly late in the trip is a pretty simple one. You never know what you're going to see around the next bend. And at age 66, Larry, I have never been less sure about what I will see around the next bend. So
Right.
Metaphors sort of occurred to me along each of the 3 segments that have made me have sort of altered my perspective on what's going on right now.
I love the placement of them. You have a Bertrand Russell quote that is just amazing. You quote so many people, Gerard Manley Hopkins. You also talk about Abraham Heschel, who, of course, inspired both you and me to live life in radical amazement, which I think reflects a lot of what you're talking about here. You said in the intro you began the journey wanting to find a motivation for continuing public service. So I want to speak to our younger leaders who are listening to this. What do you want to suggest that they do, in addition to putting the screen down and perhaps picking up a book or listening to a book? This is your chance to speak to those law students at William & Mary who want to be citizen lawyers, those law students at Boston College Law School where I teach who want to be men and women for others. You had, as you said, an 18-year civil rights journey. You finished law school, you went to Honduras. So can you talk a bit about perspective for people who are starting their journey as a professional?
Larry, what I would say, a couple of thoughts. One, everything in our society goes better when young people are very engaged. I remember growing up, I'm 66. One of my first memories was coming home from kindergarten and watching my mother crying in front of the TV because JFK had been assassinated. Then I'm now 9 years old, and I pick up the newspaper, and Martin Luther King has been assassinated. Then 2 months later, Bobby Kennedy, Vietnam War, civil rights protest, a president resigning in disgrace. When I was a young person, the world of adults to me seemed like adults have really messed things up, and I think a lot of young people today feel that. Yet I also saw young people marching in the civil rights movement, young people helping in the Vietnam War, young people getting the right to vote at age 18 in the early 1970s, and then taking that seriously. And it was young people's engagement that was fixing some of the things that I, as a kid, thought was wrong in the world. And so I learned early, when young people engage, things get better. I think young people sometimes feel like, well, we're not that politically powerful. The percentage of the electorate under age 30 might be 7 or 8%. To the contrary, young people's engagement is almost always a precursor to progress and change. And so that's something that I would strongly recommend. It gets better if you engage, and it gets worse if you don't.
I love that piece. And you show by example what a life of public service can look like. And I love the quote that you included from UVA basketball coach: to go fast, go alone; to go far, go together. You are one of those few people who spent time in your adopted hometown of Richmond. You were on the city council, the mayor, then lieutenant governor, US Senator. So it's been a life of public service. And I'd love to have your thoughts and your advice to young people about that.
I would just say that making your life about others, and this was what I learned from the missionaries in Honduras and from my parents. The Jesuit motto of Jesuit boys' schools is always men for others. Making your life about others is a way to never run out of work and to always find satisfaction. And you can decide how to do that. But it's a very Jesuit trait, but of course it's not exclusive to any one faith.
Right.
There's a great line that I heard somebody say once, that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. And I think thinking of yourself less and putting others in the foreground is important. I once described myself, I'm a very ambitious person, but I'm not at the center of my own ambitions. I'm ambitious for things that deal with others rather than myself. And so, it's a truism, but it's a truism because it's true. If you focus on others, there will always be work to do, and there will always be joy and satisfaction in that.
I love that. So we go through the book through so many folks that have inspired you, including St. Ignatius and importantly, St. Francis. Yes. Love everything around you, rejoice in all that's around you. So, Senator Kaine, what are you reading these days? What's on your nightstand?
So I'm going to show you. When you teased a little bit earlier, I'm reading a book by Father James Martin.
Oh, wonderful.
Called Come Forth, which is a book that's a couple years old, and it's his meditation on the raising of Lazarus. And I've always been very intrigued with Mary and Martha and with Lazarus and with others. And one of the things that intrigues me about the story is the Mary, Martha, and Lazarus story show us a facet of human life, which is that we sometimes only think of each other superficially. Like, are you a Mary or a Martha? Well, there's an earlier story in the gospel where Mary pays attention to Jesus while Martha is busy cooking a meal, and Jesus kind of rebukes her. But in the Lazarus story, you really get a sense of the two sisters, that Martha's the older sister and is extremely faithful to Jesus. And it kind of punctures the superficial view of Mary and Martha. Thomas, who we call Doubting Thomas, but in this story, Thomas is the one who says, well, if Jesus is going to be with Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, he might get killed, so we better go along with him. Even if it means we have to die with him, we should go along with him. We should call Thomas Steadfast Thomas. Instead, we call him Doubting Thomas. This is a great story that reveals facets that are deeper than what we often see. And that's not just in a Bible story, that's often in life. We see a facet of each other, but we don't really understand each other.
Senator Tim Kaine, I want to thank you for joining us on Authors Innovators. Walk, ride, and paddle. I'm always getting the order wrong, but I'm not sure that much matters, right?
It doesn't.
It's a terrific book. I want to thank the Senator for really, and it comes through in the book, your life of public service, from Honduras to Richmond, to your civil rights work as governor, and working hard in seriously complicated times, which you also detail in the book. So I hope people will pick it up. I hope they'll enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy your book tour. This is a book that deserves a wide audience. Thank you again.
Larry, so great to be with you. Thanks so much.